They say you don't know what you have until it's gone. For me, it wasn't that I didn't know. I just didn't care enough to protect it. The signs were there, blinking like warning lights on a dashboard, but I kept driving, convinced I could outrun the consequences. My name is Olivia. I'm 32, and this is the story of how I destroyed the best thing in my life without even realizing what I was doing until it was too late. It started on a rainy Friday night at the Rustic, a bar where our friend group gathered every week without fail. 8 of us crammed into a booth meant for 6, shoulders touching, laughter mingling with the sound of clinking glasses and the soft jazz playing in the background. My husband Ethan was unusually quiet, staring into his whiskey like it held answers to questions I didn't know he was asking. I was 3 drinks in, loud and animated, compensating for his silence by being the life of the party. So there I am, trying to explain to this client why her vision would bankrupt the company while she's insisting that I just don't understand her creative process. I laughed, gesturing wildly, as our friends chuckled. Meanwhile, I'm thinking about the pile of bills waiting at home and how I'm going to juggle everything while this woman wastes my time. I glanced at Ethan, hoping for at least a smirk. Nothing. Just that same distant stare, those dark circles under his eyes that had become permanent fixtures over the past few months. His fingers tapped an irregular rhythm against the glass, a nervous habit he'd developed recently. Something inside me snapped. "Hey, Ethan," I said, my voice cutting through the conversation. "Are you even listening? Or are you too busy feeling sorry for yourself?" The table went quiet. Our friends shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in their drinks. Megan, my best friend since college, shot me a warning look that I pointedly ignored. Ethan looked up, and there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before, a hollowness that made my stomach twist. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked quietly. I should have stopped. I should have realized something was seriously wrong. Instead, I doubled down. "It means maybe you should grow a spine and stop sulking. Some of us are actually trying to have a good time." I turned to our friends. Seriously, he's been like this for weeks, like the world is ending because his precious startup is struggling. That startup was his dream, the one he'd sacrificed everything for, including his corporate job that had once paid for my shopping sprees and our mortgage, the one he'd poured our savings into while I continued spending like nothing had changed, the one he stayed up working on until 3 a.m, night after night, while I complained about him not coming to bed with me. The silence that followed my words was deafening. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't defend himself. He just looked at me with those empty eyes, set his glass down with deliberate care, and walked out. "Drama queen," I muttered, but the words felt hollow, even as they left my mouth. Marcus, Ethan's best friend since high school, shook his head at me. "That was low, Olivia, even for you." "Oh, please," I scoffed, though something cold had settled in my chest. "He's fine. He'll get over it." But as the night went on, the empty space beside me seemed to grow, stretching into something I couldn't ignore. By midnight, when everyone was making excuses to leave earlier than usual, I felt the first stirrings of genuine worry. When he didn't come home that night, I told myself he was being childish. When he didn't answer my texts the next day, I convinced myself he was trying to make me feel guilty. By the 3rd day, when our mutual friend suddenly became unavailable whenever I called, I started to understand that something fundamental had shifted. I drove by his office on the 4th day, hoping to catch him during lunch. His car wasn't in the lot. When I called his business partner, the response was terse. "He's taking some personal time." He's my husband, I said, anger rising. I have a right to know where he is. Maybe you should have thought about that before you humiliated him in front of everyone, came the cold reply before the line went dead. It wasn't until a week later that I found the note on the kitchen counter, tucked under a stack of past due notices I'd been ignoring. Olivia, I've moved my things to a temporary place. I need space to think about what comes next for us. If anything, I'll be in touch about practical matters. That was it. 7 years of marriage, and all I got was a note that could have been written to a roommate. I crumpled it up and threw it across the room, anger boiling over. How dare he? Over one stupid comment at a bar. We'd had worse fights than this. I opened a bottle of wine, fully intending to drink my frustration away. But 2 glasses in, I was hit with a wave of panic. What if he didn't come back? What if this wasn't just a temporary cooling off period? The thought was so terrifying that I immediately called him, only to be sent straight to voicemail. Ethan, this is ridiculous, I said, trying to sound firm, but hearing the slight slur in my words. You can't just disappear because I called you out on your mood. Come home so we can talk about this like adults. When he didn't call back that night, I sent a series of increasingly desperate texts. You're being childish. Our friends think you're overreacting. At least tell me where you are so I know you're safe. I'm worried about you. Please come home. I miss you. The lack of response was deafening. As the days turned into weeks and my calls continued to go straight to voicemail, I started to replay not just that night, but our entire relationship. The pattern was so clear, I couldn't believe I'd never seen it before. There was the time I maxed out our joint credit card on a weekend shopping trip with my friends, leaving him scrambling to cover the mortgage. You'll figure it out, I'd said dismissively. You always do. Or the business dinner where I'd mocked his boring industry stories in front of his colleagues, laughing that he should leave the charming to me. I'd thought I was being witty. Looking back, I saw the humiliation in his eyes. There was the time his mother was hospitalized, and I complained about having to cancel our vacation plans. It's not like she's dying, I'd said. She just broke her hip. I remembered how he'd stared at me, something breaking in his expression, before quietly going to pack his bags to visit her alone, and countless moments where I'd interrupted him, talked over him, dismissed his concerns as overthinking, or told him to man up when he expressed anxiety about our finances. One memory in particular kept surfacing. The night he'd come home, excited about a potential investor for his startup. He'd been talking animatedly, more enthusiastic than I'd seen him in months, and I'd cut him off to complain about the grocery delivery being late. Can you focus on what matters for once? I'd snapped. I've had a terrible day, and now we don't have anything for dinner. I remembered how his face had fallen, how the light had gone out of his eyes. He'd apologized. He'd apologized to me and gone out to pick up takeout. When he returned, he never mentioned the investor again. I started to realize that what happened at the Rustic wasn't the cause. It was the final straw. By the 3rd week of his absence, I was desperate enough to swallow my pride and call his sister, Lauren. We'd never been close. She'd always been protective of Ethan in a way that I found annoying. I need to talk to him, I said, as soon as she answered. He doesn't want to talk to you, she replied flatly. Lauren, please, I'm worried sick. No one will tell me anything. She sighed, and I could practically see her weighing how much to reveal. He's safe. He's staying with friends. That's all I'm authorized to tell you. Authorized? He's my husband. Is he? Her voice was sharp. Because from where I'm standing, you haven't treated him like a partner in years. The accusation stung, especially because a part of me was beginning to fear it was true. I know I messed up, I admitted, my voice smaller, but I can't fix it if he won't even talk to me. There was a long pause. I'll tell him you called, she finally said. That's all I can do. When Ethan finally agreed to meet me for coffee, almost a month after he left, I barely recognized him. He looked lighter somehow. The dark circles were gone, and there was a calm resolve in his posture that made my practiced speech die in my throat. He was wearing a blue shirt I'd never seen before, and his hair was shorter, styled differently. It was like looking at a stranger wearing my husband's face. You look good, I said instead, hating how small my voice sounded. I feel better, he replied, not unkindly, but with a detachment that terrified me. I've been seeing someone. My heart stopped. You're, cheating? He, almost smiled. A therapist, Olivia. I've been seeing a therapist. Oh, I didn't know whether to feel relieved or more worried. Is it helping? It is. I'm starting to understand why I stayed so long in a relationship where I was constantly made to feel inadequate. His voice was steady, clinical, almost. Do you know what emotional abuse is, Olivia? The word hit me like a physical blow. Abuse? That's ridiculous. We had problems, sure, but you never hit me, no, but you systematically tore down my self-worth for years. You belittled me in public, dismissed my feelings, manipulated me with guilt when I tried to establish boundaries, and made me responsible for your financial irresponsibility while mocking my concerns. He laid it out so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that I couldn't even argue because he was right. Every word was true, and hearing it described so plainly made me physically ill. I never thought of it that way, I whispered. I know. That's part of the problem. I reached for his hand, but he pulled back. That small rejection felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I still love you, I said, and I meant it more in that moment than I had in years. We can fix this. I'll change. I'll go to therapy too. I'll do whatever it takes. His expression softened slightly, but the resolve in his eyes didn't waver. I believe that you want to change right now, but I don't believe you understand how deep this goes or how much work it would take. Then help me understand, I pleaded. Don't just walk away. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. Do you remember last Christmas, when your mother criticized the gift I gave her, and instead of defending me, you joined in and said I wasn't good at thoughtful gestures? I winced. I was just trying to smooth things over with Mom. You know how she gets. Or the time I got passed over for a promotion, and you said maybe if I had more backbone, I wouldn't always be overlooked. That was just... Or when I told you I was thinking of seeing a therapist for my anxiety last year, and you told me to just have a drink and lighten up because everyone's stressed. Each example hit harder than the last. I couldn't defend any of it. I don't think you're intentionally cruel, Olivia, he continued, his voice gentler now, but you've spent our entire relationship prioritizing your needs, your image, and your comfort over mine. And when I tried to express that I was drowning, you told me to swim harder. Tears rolled down my cheeks, and for once, I didn't try to manipulate the situation by playing the victim. I'm sorry, I whispered. I am so, so sorry. I believe you, he said quietly. But right now, I need to prioritize my own healing. Does that mean there's no chance for us? He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. Maybe someday, if we both do the work we need to do. But I can't make any promises, and neither should you. As I watched him walk away, I felt something I'd never truly experienced before: complete accountability. Not the performative kind where I'd say I'm sorry while mentally justifying my actions, but the crushing, transformative weight of truly seeing the damage I'd caused. That night, I drank until I couldn't feel anything. Then I called my sister. He says I emotionally abused him. I sobbed into the phone. I didn't mean to. I swear I didn't mean to hurt him. Cassie, always the more sensible one, didn't immediately jump to comfort me as she usually did. What exactly did you do, Liv? And so I told her everything: the belittling comments, the financial irresponsibility, the dismissal of his feelings. With each confession, I expected her to defend me, to assure me I wasn't as bad as I was making myself sound. Instead, she was quiet for a long time. Cass, I finally prompted. I think, she said slowly, that you need to take a hard look at yourself. Because what you're describing, if Ethan was doing those things to you, I'd be telling you to leave him. Her words were like a bucket of ice water. So you think he's right? That I'm abusive? I think you picked up more of Mom's traits than you realize, she said gently. Remember how she used to make Dad feel about himself? How she'd cut him down in front of people, then act like he was overreacting if he got upset. I remembered. Our mother, charming and vivacious in public, relentlessly critical in private. Our father, gradually becoming quieter, more withdrawn, until he was barely a presence in our home. The way we walked on eggshells around her moods, the way she made every problem about herself. I'm not like Mom, I protested, but the denial sounded weak, even to my own ears. Maybe not entirely, Cassie agreed, but enough that you should be worried about it, enough that you should get help. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've been doing the hardest work of my life, twice weekly therapy sessions that leave me emotionally exhausted, support groups where I've had to confront the patterns I inherited from my own parents, financial counseling to address the spending habits I used as emotional band-aids. I've learned terms like narcissistic tendencies and emotional manipulation. I've had to face the ugly truth that I've been using people, not just Ethan, but everyone in my life, to fulfill my needs without considering theirs. I've had to accept that my charm, which I'd always considered my greatest asset, was often weaponized to get my way. The first few weeks of therapy were a nightmare. I'd leave each session feeling raw and exposed, defensive and angry. She doesn't understand, I'd tell myself about my therapist, Dr. Rivera. She's making me sound like a monster. But gradually, with each painful session, the picture became clearer. I wasn't a monster, but I wasn't the victim I'd always cast myself as either. I was someone who'd never learned healthy ways to connect, to love, to exist in a relationship without trying to control it. Your mother taught you that love is conditional, Dr. Rivera explained during one particularly difficult session, that people only value you when you're entertaining, when you're on. So you develop these strategies to maintain control, to ensure you were always the center of attention, because in your mind, if you weren't, you'd be abandoned. But I abandoned Ethan, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Emotionally, I mean. I left him alone in our marriage. She nodded, a small, sad smile on her face. That's a powerful insight, Olivia. Powerful, yes, and devastating. Ethan and I talk occasionally now, brief, careful conversations that feel like tiptoeing through a minefield. He's doing well. His startup found new investors. He's dating someone new, a quiet, thoughtful woman who teaches special education. I try not to hate her, though the jealousy sometimes consumes me. The first time he told me about her, I had a panic attack so severe I had to call Dr. Rivera's emergency line. The thought of him with someone else made me physically ill. Not because I couldn't stand the idea of him being happy without me, but because I couldn't stand the idea that someone else could make him happy in ways I had failed to. This is good, Dr. Rivera insisted during our next session. This pain you're feeling, it's showing you that you genuinely care about his well-being, not just what he can do for you. It didn't feel good. It felt like dying. But I was learning that growth rarely comes without pain. Last week, he told me he's proud of the work I'm doing. Those words meant more to me than any validation I've ever received. But they also broke my heart because I finally understand what he needed from me all along. Not just love, but respect. Not just passion, but partnership. Not just my presence, but my consideration. I remember a moment early in our marriage when we were lying in bed, limbs tangled together, his hand tracing patterns on my back. "You make me feel alive," I'd whispered to him. "You make me feel safe," he'd replied. At the time, I'd thought my compliment was better, more romantic, more passionate. Now I understand the profound gift he was offering me, his trust, his vulnerability, and I'd thrown it away. I don't know if Ethan will ever come back to me. Some days, I'm not sure he should. The woman I was with him wasn't someone I'm proud of being. The woman I'm trying to become now is learning to stand on her own, financially, emotionally, completely. Last month, I finally moved out of our house. It was too big for just me, too full of memories, and frankly, too expensive. I found a modest apartment closer to my office. For the first time in my adult life, I'm living within my means, cooking my own meals, not drowning my loneliness in shopping sprees or nights out. It's quiet, sometimes unbearably so, but in that quiet, I'm starting to hear my own thoughts more clearly, without the constant noise of social validation I'd always surrounded myself with. They say you don't know what you have until it's gone, but that's not entirely true. Sometimes you know exactly what you have, but you think it's unbreakable. You think you can keep taking and taking without giving back. You think love is enough to weather any storm, even the ones you create yourself. I know better now, but knowledge and wisdom are different things. Wisdom comes from pain, from loss, from facing the hardest truth of all. Sometimes the villain in your story is looking back at you in the mirror. My name is Olivia. I'm 32 years old, and this is the story of how I'm trying to become someone worthy of the love I threw away. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a utility bill and a flyer for a local pizza place. I'd been expecting them, of course, but the sight of them still knocked the wind out of me. I sat on my kitchen floor, manila envelope in hand, and cried until I had no tears left. That night, I did something I hadn't done since college. I called my father. "Daddy," I whispered when he answered. the childhood name slipping out unbidden. Olivia? He sounded surprised. We hadn't spoken in months, not since a tense Christmas dinner where I'd been more my mother's daughter than I cared to admit. Are you okay? No, I admitted, and then it all came pouring out. The separation, the therapy, the divorce papers sitting unsigned on my counter, my fear that I'd become my mother. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then he said, I think I need to tell you something about your mother and me. What followed was a story I'd never heard, or perhaps had never been willing to hear. How my vivacious, charming mother had slowly eroded his self-esteem over decades. How he'd stayed because he loved us, because he hoped she'd change, because leaving felt like failing. How he'd finally left, not when she'd had an affair, though she did, but when he realized he no longer recognized himself in the mirror. The hardest part, he said softly, wasn't losing her. It was finding myself again afterward. But Liv, it was worth it. The pain, the starting over, all of it was worth it to remember who I was. How did you do it? I asked, desperate for a roadmap out of the darkness. One day at a time, he said simply, and with help, a lot of help. The next day, I signed the divorce papers and sent them back to Ethan's lawyer. It was the most painful thing I'd ever done, but also the most honest. He deserved his freedom, and I needed to face the consequences of my actions. Months have passed since that day. Life has moved in unexpected directions. The divorce was finalized in a quiet, civilized proceeding that felt nothing like the dramatic courtroom scenes I'd imagined. We sat across from each other, signing papers that ended 7 years of marriage, and then we walked to a nearby cafe and had coffee. Are you happy? I asked him, stirring my latte absently. He considered this carefully, in that thoughtful way he always had, the one I'd once found so frustrating and now missed desperately. I'm at peace, he finally said, which isn't the same thing, but it's what I need right now. I nodded, understanding more than I would have a year ago. Dr. Rivera says I'm making progress with my narcissistic tendencies. I offered a small smile. Apparently, admitting you have them is half the battle. That sounds like progress, he agreed, and there was genuine warmth in his eyes, though it wasn't the love I still longed for. I sold most of my designer stuff, I continued, paid off the credit card debt. I'm living within my means for the first time in, well, ever. I'm proud of you, he said, and I believed him. As we parted ways outside the cafe, he hesitated, then gave me an awkward hug. Take care of yourself, Olivia. You too, I whispered, fighting back tears. I watched him walk away, not with the bitterness I'd once felt, but with a complicated mixture of regret and hope. Hope, not that he would come back, but that I would continue becoming someone better than I had been. That night, I sat alone in my new apartment, smaller than our house had been, but all I needed, and wrote in the journal my therapist had suggested. I wrote about accountability and growth, about learning to sit with uncomfortable truths, about the difference between saying, I'm sorry, and truly making amends. I wrote about how sometimes the most important relationship you need to repair is the one with yourself. The next morning, I woke to a text from Ethan. Thanks for yesterday. It meant a lot to talk like that. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. A year ago, I would have seen this as an opening, a chance to pull him back. I would have crafted the perfect response designed to make him miss me, to make him doubt his decision to leave. Instead, I wrote, "Thank you too. I'm grateful we could end things with kindness. I hope you find all the happiness you deserve." And I meant it, every word. 3 weeks later, my father came to visit. We spent the weekend talking, really talking, in a way we never had before. He showed me old photographs of himself as a young man before he met my mother. "That's who I'm becoming again," he said, pointing to a picture of himself, grinning widely on a hiking trail. Bit by bit. Looking at the joy in his face, both in the photograph and sitting across from me now, I felt a flicker of hope. If he could rebuild himself after decades of what I was now recognizing as emotional abuse, maybe I could too. Maybe I could unlearn the toxic patterns I'd inherited, the ones I'd perpetuated without even realizing it. "Do you think people can really change?" I asked him as we walked through a park near my apartment. He considered this, his pace slowing. "I think that we are always becoming. The question is whether we're becoming more or less of who we truly are." I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about becoming, about authenticity, about the parts of myself I hid behind the charm and manipulation, the parts that might actually be worth nurturing. Last month, I ran into Marcus, Ethan's best friend, at a coffee shop. I nearly turned and walked out when I saw him, expecting coldness or outright hostility. Instead, he waved me over. "You look different," he said after an awkward greeting. "I feel different," I replied honestly. "Ethan mentioned you've been doing some work on yourself." His tone was cautious, but not unkind. "I'm trying," I said simply. "It's the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's worth it." Marcus nodded, a small, appraising look crossing his face. "For what it's worth, I hope you figure it out. You weren't always—" He trailed off. "A complete nightmare," I suggested, with a self-deprecating smile. He laughed, genuinely laughed. I was going to say, difficult, but sure. We chatted for a few more minutes. Nothing deep, just surface level catching up. But as I was leaving, he called after me. "Hey, Olivia, we're having a thing next weekend. Game night at Rachel's. You should come if you want." I was too stunned to respond with anything but a nod. An invitation back into the social circle I'd been exiled from. A small olive branch, but one I hadn't expected to receive. I didn't go to game night. I wasn't ready to face everyone at once, to navigate the complex emotions of being in a room where my worst behavior had been on display. But I texted Marcus to thank him for the invitation, and he responded that the offer stood for next time. Next time, the possibility of it hung in the air like a fragile promise. I'm not the villain of my story anymore, but I'm not the hero either. I'm just a person trying to learn from her mistakes, carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom, and hoping that someday, whether with Ethan or someone new or even on my own, I'll be able to love without destroying what I touch. 2 days ago, I passed the 6-month mark of my therapy. Dr. Rivera asked me to reflect on what I've learned. "I've learned that I'm not my mother," I said slowly, "and that even if I were, that wouldn't doom me to repeat her patterns forever. I've learned that real strength isn't about control or getting your way. It's about vulnerability and honesty and doing the right thing, even when it hurts." She smiled, jotting something in her notebook. "And what would you say to Ethan now if you could go back to that night at the bar?" I thought about it, the familiar pain twisting in my chest. I'd tell him I see him, that his feelings matter, that I'm sorry for making him feel small to make myself feel big. I took a deep breath, and then I'd shut up and listen, really listen. "That's a good answer," she said softly. "You've come a long way, Olivia." I have, but the road ahead is still long, winding through territory I'm only beginning to map. There are days when old habits surge back, when I find myself reaching for the armor of charm and deflection rather than sitting with uncomfortable truths. There are nights when I lie awake, replaying every mistake, every cruel word, every missed opportunity to be better. But there are also moments of clarity so profound they take my breath away. Moments when I catch a glimpse of who I might become if I keep doing this work. Someone thoughtful, someone kind, someone worthy of the kind of love I threw away. They say you don't know what you have until it's gone. I say you don't know who you are until you've lost everything that once defined you. And painful as it is, there's freedom in that discovery, the chance to rebuild from the ground up, to create something stronger and truer than what came before. My name is Olivia. I'm 32 years old, and this is no longer just a story about what I lost. It's about what I might still find if I have the courage to keep looking. Yesterday, I drove past our old house. There's a new family living there now. I saw them moving in a few weeks ago, a young couple with a toddler and a dog. They've planted flowers in the garden beds I always meant to tend to, but never did. I didn't feel the pang of loss I expected. Instead, I felt something like peace. That chapter of my life is closed. The pages have turned, and while I didn't get the ending I wanted, maybe I got the one I needed, the one that would force me to become something better than I had been. As I pulled away from the curb, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Ethan. "Just heard, your project at work got approved. Congratulations. I always knew you could do it." A simple message, nothing romantic or suggestive, just one human being acknowledging another's achievement. But it meant everything. Because for the first time, I didn't immediately think about how to use his kindness to get something more from him. I didn't strategize about turning this small interaction into a pathway back into his life. I just felt grateful. Grateful that despite everything, he still cared enough to celebrate my success. I texted back a simple, "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you." And it did. It really did. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if Ethan and I will ever find our way back to each other, or if that's even what's best for either of us. I don't know if I'll ever fully heal the wounded parts of myself that led me to hurt someone I loved, but I know I'm trying. I know I'm growing. I know that even on the hardest days, when shame threatens to swallow me whole, I'm still showing up for therapy, for my own healing, for the painful process of becoming someone new. And maybe that's enough for now. Maybe that's all any of us can do. Wake up each day and try to be a little better than we were the day before, a little kinder, a little more honest, a little more worthy of the love we hope to give and receive. My story isn't over. It's just beginning.